I had a plan for today, questions, and several of them drawn from you. And then yesterday, given what we did in gathering questions in our current edge of things, I went back and kind of reworked our set of questions and wove in a number of your questions. And there were pools of questions coming from different voices. And so I've kind of really, this is not my idea of the ideal set of questions, because I think a pithy question should just pull everything together and be so ripe to be explored through just a few words. And instead, what I have are puddles of questions. But I realize that is true to our situation, and it's just, there are a lot of pithy questions within the puddle, and so because the puddle is related closely, really closely, you can choose your angle from within the group of questions. And so we're going to try to take up 4 questions this morning, 2 before the break and 2 after. The first one is, the theme is Homo sapien sapien. Us, Homo sapien sapien, yeah. Us as a species on the planet. Mary Catherine wrote, can we think ourselves as members of a species, members of planet Earth? Can we perceive and act from that knowledge? And I had asked, how do we understand who we are in the face of this? What are we? Who are we? What are our limits? What are our strengths? To notice ourselves as a phenomenon in this living system of Earth. What do we make of who we are at this moment? Why are we so disconnected from the living organism that we are part of? What do we make of that? So this is a big puddle, and perhaps we bring it down to who are we? What are our limits? What are our strengths? How do we understand ourselves at this moment within the living system of the earth? And anyone who'd like to start? Please take the talking piece.
I think that who we are, essentially and truly, is in complete contradiction to the story we are being fed about who we are for reasons that we can understand. And I think we are essentially profoundly loving creatures who seek and need connection and cooperation. When we're born, the very first thing a child does is seek out the comfort of a parent's eyes and embrace and nurturing. And that seeking, I think, continues. That of all the characteristics that evolved as human beings became who we are, I think perhaps the primary one is the ability to cooperate and plan collaboratively for the common good. And to think of ourselves as part of a whole, I think, is essential to our happiness. And so we seek out, in so many different ways, some of them pathetic, connection. This is what I believe. And that our grief comes from separation, from the earth and from one another. I think we seek not only connection with other beings, but also connection with some sort of force that is bigger than we are, and that this also has evolved as being an important part of us. And whether that's the earth or a divinity, it doesn't seem to matter. It's just that kind of yearning. And so we're creatures of yearning for connection, I believe. And that view of human nature does not work for capitalism. Capitalism cannot abide that view. For capitalism to work, we have to be individuals in competition. There have to be winners and losers. There have to be individual consumers. And we have to find our fulfillment in things, in connection to things rather than one another. So we are fed constantly, continually, a story that's different from the story that we know. And we understand why we are fed that story rather than another. But I think the result is a profound grief at being denied what are truly and essentially the sources of our comfort and solace, and being required constantly to deny our connectivity and to live finally in a world that is structurally, it is constructed for separation. The single-family home, the car, all these structures of separation. The bathrooms are all structures of separation. And why is that? It is not an accident. It's the requirement of capitalism. That's what I believe.
What's the question?
Who are we?
Who are we? I speak about this a lot with my daughter. We have these amazing conversations as I drive her to school, and we'll hear about some amazing accomplishments like detecting gravitational waves or landing a craft on a comet, or and I think we are capable of such amazing things. And then at the same time you hear about the violence we commit against each other and our planet, and the poisoning of our water and our air, and the killing of our oceans and our elephants, and it's such a contradiction. And it's almost like science is racing to show how interconnected and our origins and confirm our identity as these cosmic beings before we kill each other, and I agree completely with what she said about capitalism and so many isms, there are so many systems of control, and I want to sit down with people who feel like they need to control everything. Where does that come from? Maybe it is as early as wanting to know what's going to happen when I go in my cave tonight, or is the fire going to be there, and is the food going to be there? And, maybe it's that old, but I know that there are still many people on this planet who have a sense of who they are and what their place is in this sphere that we call planet Earth, and I think part of the task is allowing those voices to be heard, allowing ourselves to be reminded of what science is confirming, in so many ways. So that's where we are.
Your puddle of questions raised one for me, which I have never asked myself before. So this is a first in my own brain, which is whoever named us, whoever came up with Homo sapiens sapiens. I mean, somebody must have given us a name, right? Some biologist. Does anyone know? I think this is, I don't know, I'm just really intrigued by that right now. But, I would like to know about this person and what he or she, probably a he, was thinking. Like, what were you thinking? Anyway, so I'm going to have to look that up. I guess the question out of this set of questions that intrigues me the most, and I've been in conversation about quite a bit recently, is this question of how do we understand ourselves in the living system Earth. Because, we're now in the year when some commission is going to decide whether or not we're going to call this the Anthropocene officially or not. And I think it's an interesting moment of recognition of our force as humans, collectively, as not as individuals, but as a collective force on the planet. And so in my context of dealing with people who are grappling with climate change and whether or not to believe it, many of the folks who used to be very skeptical have come around to sort of saying, yeah, I think something is going on, but it's still not human cause, because the underlying understanding that we collectively could have such a big impact is just, it's not what we are sort of evolutionarily, get that we could. So I think there's that moment, a truly frontal cortex kind of moment of getting that on the level we haven't gotten it before, which I think is an evolutionary leap. And it's truly phenomenal to be sort of conscious of being in the middle of an evolutionary leap. I find that, I don't know, we've been witnessing other species go extinct, which is another, leap of sorts in a negative sense, but to become aware that we ourselves are evolving into a new form of consciousness, I find is just fascinating to me. So that is going on at the same time that I feel like we're, we don't just have to cognitively understand that. We have to somehow accept it on a gut level that this is true. And it reminds me of some things that in the conversations with Carol and her work, we sort of come across of philosophers and psychologists basically speaking to the ambiguity we have had as a species forever about being here on planet. And the ambiguity being part of the fact that if we were to accept that, it would involve huge responsibility and accepting limits, because everything on the planet, will die and has a limit. And that is the piece that we have never quite wanted to accept. Especially not as, we were talking yesterday about sort of the adolescent posture as a culture and as a species, we have, mostly as a culture, I want to say, Western culture in particular, we have had. So I think I find it just a really fascinating moment of having to come into a cognitive and an emotional willingness to be here and to really own that place. I don't think we're even beginning to be there. Despite the fact that some folks are believing we can geoengineer and manage this whole thing like a machine, which is, David Keith in particular has expressed that opinion that by 2100 we will control everything on the planet, which is just to me a hubris of untold proportions. But, be that as it may, I mean, that's his dream, and that's his evolutionary sort of, rolling out the human future, that we become godlike. So it's I think is, historically we've struggled with this, right? We've always wanted to be God. We always wanted to control. And we've yet never really accepted that role. And now maybe we are forced to by the sheer fact that we have such a big power. And will we take that responsibility it's just a big question for me right now.
So when you were asking that question, Sarah, what came to my mind was there's the story of the Buddha's enlightenment, and the story goes that after he was enlightened under the Bodhi tree, he sat for 6 years under a Bodhi tree, he wandered through the Indian countryside and not knowing what to say, and he spent 2 weeks in silence not knowing what to say. And he finally stumbled on a group of people, and a small group, and they asked him these questions. They said, who are you? Are you, one of them asked, are you a man? And one of them asked, are you a god? And one of them asked, are you a spirit? And one of them asked, are you a naga? And one of them asked, are you an animal? And the Buddha replied, I am awake. That was all he said. So I was thinking about, as you were talking, what was coming to me as my expression of who we are is that we are awake. We are naturally organic, wild, free, animal Buddhas. Somehow, Buddha means the one that is awake, actually. Just that's all it means. That's why he was called that, because that was what he answered, I'm awake. So one part of us is awake. One part of us knows that we are connected. One part of us knows the part that is a child still, knows that we are safe and that we are free. And some other part of us is disconnected, confused, and is gotten away from that childlike wonder and that natural awakeness that we carry in our being. So, who we are awake, and have forgotten that we are awake.
So I have all these thoughts chasing around in my mind, all the smart and wise and insightful, deep things all of you keep saying and trying to meet them. And there's some part of me that doesn't want to be in the world of thoughts anymore, that there's some other place I'm yearning to be and I haven't been able to get to yet here. I don't even know exactly what that means. The question and the first Kathy's response, it triggered for me this strong gendered reaction. She was describing the work of women in this world. And for 14 years I led arguably one of the leading institutions that exist for the sole purpose of holding that work, women's work, for at least in the academy. And I was so careful always not to essentialize, not to make claims about women that were extreme and unaware of the continua on which all of us always live, and ways in which we're all part masculine, part feminine, you know. And that's all true. But this imbalance, and I too went to Homo sapiens. I'd never thought of those 3 words. And I thought, I didn't think about who came up with it. We better find out. But holy cow. I mean, isn't that the whole problem? Homo sapiens sapiens. Where's the feminine? Where's the heart? Where's the yearning? All those things that capitalism is writing out of the picture. We had a whole discussion at the beginning, Susie and Sarah and I, for a long time about this council. Our impulse was it had to be women. It had to be just women. And we didn't quite know why we thought that, but we really strongly thought that. And then we argued with ourselves about whether that was right and why were we doing that way. It seems to me now so right that we are women doing this work. There's a piece of work of healing, of recovery, of knowing a different way and kind of knowing that has to come from the heart. There's a quotation I quote it all the time when I give talks. It's Martin Luther King, and he talks about power and love. Power is nothing more than, he says, this is a quote direct, I think, but the ability to achieve purpose. And love is the drive to sustain connection. And it's the clash of immoral power with powerless morality that constitutes the crisis of our time. So it's something about bringing all of that into a balance again. The power and the connection, the other quotation I love is from the Yale, I'm forgetting his name, but the Yale chaplain in the 60s who, thank you. No, he was the president, the chaplain.
Chaplain.
Right, we all know his name, it doesn't matter anyway. Names have all gone out of my mind, they're just gone. My mind is leaking. Maybe it doesn't matter. But it was, the world is too dangerous for anything but truth, and too small for anything but love. So it's the work of love. That's the work. That's the healing work, I think.
I'm still searching for that name, too.
William Sloan.
Thank you, of course.
Thank you. One of the biggest changes in my life in the last 3 years is to begin regularly to think about us in this very, very long trajectory of time. I just somehow had never really spent much time in that space of looking at us as part of this enormous continuum of evolution. And, definitely Mary Evelyn and Brian Swim's book. And then starting to think about geological time, differently. And it seems various other images and opportunities come to look at us in that kind of context. This amazing budding forth in this huge, long continuum of change, constant change, and the force of creativity without any notion of good or bad, just creativity, moving from whatever that original impulse was in the Big Bang, and the arising of infinite numbers of locations and realities all through this massive universe, which I still can't even begin to grasp at all. And then us, where there was this balance, a certain amount of gravity, a certain relationship to the possibility of water, the whole situation that allowed for life. Where's Joni there? This sort of biological set of possibilities arising, which constantly can take different forms and randomly take forms. I mean, we are not, who are we? I mean, really, this is really a question, How did this happen? That we are conscious and that we are awake and we are those who can reflect. I mean, and that we apparently are the only species that we know about with those capacities. So this has been such a different process to come to some moment of just trying to get my head around, okay, this tiny opportunity, tiny number of years that we've existed as a species with this kind of potential and consciousness and our gifts, the cleverness, the endless curiosity. Oh, let's try this. The making, the fact that we can make new things, and we're fascinated by that, or some people are anyway. I mean, I'm fascinated by knitting, but I don't think I'm fascinated by making airplanes. So it's just different kinds of making. So here we are, and we have this capacity for reflection, and we're this effort, this fleeting moment in a way, and there's nothing good or bad about that. It's a moment, an opportunity, a situation where great insight and wisdom and perspective is possible and maybe isn't possible. And we didn't get big enough frontal cortexes, apparently, is what a psychologist friend told me. She said we're underdeveloped in terms of our ability to think about planning. I don't know all the things that the frontal cortex does, but ours is not doing very well, I guess, in terms of thinking ahead. Never mind the grounding that we've needed. I don't know which parts of the body and brain should have aligned a little bit better to keep us more connected, and yet maybe this is just accidental that capitalism arose the way it did, and we are now in its throes, and it's spitting us out. So I don't have any summary comment other than, I guess, being grateful to see us more as part of this large, large, large creative flow, which we don't know where it's going. And there's something that will be continuing no matter what we do to the planet. There's life force. And I hope that the wisdom and insight that we are capable of will be able to arise fully enough to help us regain a relationship with most of the living aspects of this planet and be one of them.
I love this question. Well, I think one thing about who we are is that out of our, is it 3 billion years since the first life, 4.5 billion years of the planet, this sort of form of modern humans is 10,000 years since the beginning of agriculture. So I don't think we should just answer who we are based on the last 10,000 out of 3 billion years. So there's this big legacy where it seems like it was, those principles of connection and interdependency that Kathy grounded us in at the beginning of the round, was the full picture. And then a much shorter period of time of gaining the perspective of differentiation and looking out from space and seeing in a way what we already knew, but believing it more maybe. That's what you said, Susie, made me think about. I'm also thinking back to our circles yesterday, where it feels like we identified, the work ahead of us as addressing disconnection or creating connection. And then, Kathy, what you said at the beginning, that just says then our work is just recognizing who we already are. I mean, that seems so easy, right? Expressing our true nature is the solution to everything that we've been talking about. If I listen to your beautiful, logical flow. And I think it connects very much, Willa, to waking up. I'm fascinated by this research in the non-rational, non-cognitive part that influences our decision making. And I just want to tell you about one experiment that really influenced me. So these researchers put people in a waiting room where there was a big computer monitor with a screensaver, and half the people, the screensaver was a forest with a brook, like a video of that, and the other half it was a video of dollar bills circling or piling up or something like that. And then they told people they had to go down this hall where they were going to take a math test. But actually the experiment happened in the hallway, where the experimenter walked down the hallway toward the subject with a can full of pencils and manufactured a collision. And what they measured was how many pencils did the subject pick up. So how cooperative were they? And I don't remember the ratio, but it was 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. The people who sat next to the brook picked up 3 times as many pencils as the people who sat next to the dollar bills. So I just feel like that's proof that Kathy is right.
You're right.
And there's a very, you didn't need it, I know, but I mean, but isn't there a beautiful circular logic to that when we create systems that are connected, that start with that, we actually produce in ourselves the type of behavior that promotes more of that. And so as a systems analyst, when we know we're really up against time, then we need those positive reinforcing feedback loops where things snowball on themselves, where a little bit in one direction creates even more in that direction. And it almost doesn't matter where you start. You start by deciding you're connected and building connected systems, which then work on our neurological apparatus to make us behave more connected. You can start anywhere in that circle and have it feed upon itself. And I think the last thing I'd add, I think along in the big bucket of capitalism is education, and they're systems that are mutually reinforcing. But just with my own 2 daughters, who the first part of their education was in nature and was very free because we homeschooled them, and the second part was in a pretty traditional setting. And they've reflected a lot in ways that have helped me learn all the ways in which separation is so, you'd have to say it was a desired effect of that system to create separation. And it's not, I guess it's not surprising if what Kathy says is right, that the dominant economic system needs people to feel separated in order to function, then you need a system to manufacture separation. And I think we've done a really good job at it.
You know, if you look at the long span of human evolution, one of the things that was essential was creating a period of extreme dependency. I mean, you know, look around even at other mammals that require a relationship with at least one parent, or birds. 1 year, 2 years, they're mature, they're reproducing. How long does it take rabbits to be grown-ups? Right? This is a remarkable fact about human beings that goes with our plasticity. We're not born with a program of how to survive. We're totally dependent. We've all, at some level, experienced being totally dependent, learning to trust. And this is a major contrast with other species. Childhood. And yet, over time, we've moved towards saying that the goal of life is to not be dependent. Now, what strikes me is that the knowledge of interdependence, the experience, the search for someone we can trust, is, we don't lose that. We learn to cope without it, in many cases. And so, if you study the child-rearing literature, you know, advice to mothers, independence training, the work that I've done on aging, and just parenthetically, if the evolution of childhood was critical to human beings, maybe the evolution of post-reproductive old age is equally critical to human beings. Moving into having a new life stage may make a huge difference. So here we are, in which our key to our flexibility, our resilience, our adaptability, is that we're not pre-programmed. We can adapt by learning instead of genetically. On the one hand, but on the other hand, we keep inventing systems that say the thing you want to get away from is depending on other people. That full maturity must be standing on your own 2 feet. And we now live in a society that is instructing us not to trust each other. Okay? Now, you know, it's like the biblical quote, you know, in order to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to become like a little child. Our childishness is one of our most fundamental characteristics. This extreme dependence. And it's getting longer, isn't it, in human societies? The dependence on parents, the years that are called years of education. And I think the thing we struggle with is how to carry the willingness to learn and the trust in surrounding adults into responsible adulthood. And so clearly a lot of what you have to do is think about education, because education's all around this self-reliance business. But you know, the increase in individualism, which is steady and continues, has to do with saying, I'm not part of something else. I'm a freestanding agent. And that, it seems to me, is the central danger, is this insistence on being self-determining instead of interdetermining. How do you do it? I don't know. But it's, if you ask me where to look for resources, I would say look at children, learn from them. Because that's how we became human, was by the development of childhood.
There's so much been said, it's hard for me to even say anything because it's really a good question. Starting off, everyone has given amazing answers, and I've been trying to digest it all into what I want to say. And when I think of Homo sapiens, being a biologist, I mean, I think of us as a species, almost first as a species. And that's just my perspective of looking at it from my background. Even with my husband, when we're out on the porch and a fox comes by, I'm like, the fox says, "Oh, it's just the primates. Don't worry about it," right? The responses of animals to us is, I just consider ourselves primates. And we watch a lot of monkeys down in Costa Rica, and remarkably similar behavior. There's empathy, there's fighting, there's sharing, there's the joy of the babies and the caring of the babies. And we are not so separate from these species. And I think it's just such a beautiful way to view ourselves, because we're so akin. Camille, you talk about it, we're all part of the same DNA, and it's so obvious in some of these other species. And I really enjoy that. But you see the same dilemmas, the same need for competition, the same need for empathy and cooperation. And I usually start from there in terms of asking, who are we as a species, and how can we find the better part of us within that? We're part of every ecosystem on the planet now. We are a vital member species within virtually every ecosystem on the planet in some way or another. And we have profound effects on the planet. If we were observing some other species doing the same thing, the first thing we want to do is call them, right? Even some of our iconic species, there's too many elk in the Rocky Mountain National Park. Let's call them, because they're causing problems, right? Mm-hmm. That's a dangerous way to think of our own species. I don't think we want to call ourselves, but it is something. It is a prevalent fear that I have, that when the dangers of our impact on the planet is realized, and we are viewed in some kind of way that I know many people view us as a species, that is sort of the natural take on things. So how do we get beyond that? And I think all of you have said things that just resonate with me so profoundly, this competition versus this cooperation in the community sense. And I keep looking at you, Beth, because you mentioned that study. And I think, and I'm not trained in this, but my view is that, we want to be individuals because of as long as we are happily able to do that, but as soon as we need somebody, we turn to community. So need makes us become community. Need of things beyond what we can achieve brings us back together as a community, which I hope is what we will begin to do soon. There's another study showing in agrarian communities, people that grow rice need, in these Southeast Asian, most parts of the world where rice was the central part of the culture, they needed each other and they cooperated fully in different ways than, say, our agrarian society where wheat, you could do it as an individual. You didn't depend on others for certain big community level things like the flooding of the field and stuff like that. I can't remember the details of why they were so different in terms of determining individualism versus community. But when they've done the similar study of offering people cultures that have arisen out of rice farming versus out of wheat and the type of farming we're used to, they pick the smaller portions of a treat being offered to them. So they pick the one that hurts the community the least, whereas in the other communities that we're used to, they take the big one. Because you're stupid if you're not competing and taking the big one. That's how, the individualism is glorified, and we see it everywhere. When I'm a bird watcher, and most of my friends are listers, and I say I'm not a lister because I don't like to compete. But by that very nature, I said, I know that makes me a loser. So you either compete and you win, or by default, you're a loser. So I think, how can we appeal to this frontal cortex part of us to get back? And what I'm looking for is how do we increase the feedback for altruism? And we can use whatever word we want, but it is altruism, right, that holds a community together in a lot of ways. And empathy for another person as well as empathy for another species. So how do we I'm going to end this with a question, but how do we reward altruism? We don't reward that in our society, do we? I mean, I keep bringing this up, but I talk about, the good people. We had conversations about this last night. There are extremely good people, and they're all around us, and they're overlooked. And they had a very big role in societies, and I think we've looked over them because we glorify the competitors and not the people with altruism. So as a primate, I think I don't know how to close that, but I find this to be a remarkable question. I'd like to hear more.
We're going to switch gears and do a question where I'd like to ask everybody to try to respond just in a couple of sentences. And we'll go around a couple times if we can keep it a little more concentrated. This is another puddle of questions. Silence, pausing, deep listening. What does silence offer us now? What happens when we pause? What does deep listening offer us now? Maybe these are all capacities of Homo sapiens sapien. Pausing, deep listening, entering silence intentionally. So you can choose in that nexus of questions. What would you like to offer in response?
I'd offer one thing, building on the train of thought that Kathy started in the last circle. I think silence and deep listening is active revolutionary insurrection against the capitalist messages. Like, I'm not going to look at your ads. I'm not going to listen to all the ways that I'm not good enough because I don't have some product or thing. Or I think, and then in the process, it's a way to discover my connection with myself and my connection with others. So it's doubly revolutionary.
Where I go with that question is to think, so I've been thinking about what do we not want to know? What is denial? Because we use noise as a way of avoiding listening, as a way of avoiding knowing. And often cocooned noise with earphones, So we literally can't hear other people. And so I think the fact that a discussion of deep listening is moving through the society is a good sign. We become more resistant to advertising and more open to the feelings of other people as well as their opinions and learning new things. A while ago, before we all started meeting, I began to think about a certain attitude towards learning as itself a form of spirituality. To sort of be asking, what are those flowers teaching me? What is the coloration of the sky at dawn teaching me? And it's a different way of looking at the world. And I think often there's a kind of those two approaches converge. Listen, look, assume that everything around you is, among other things, there to teach you. And your job is to take it in, be open, welcome it. So that what we learn, what we encounter, whether it's painful or joyful, expands our world instead of limiting it by building up defenses against it.
I like the sequence that you put these in. So I think, for me, I believe that silence, puts one in the position of awareness. I think that pausing allows one to move away from the system one thinking to the more system two thinking, kind of like similar to what Bonnie was talking about, allowing us to avoid too much reactionary thinking and thinking from within. And then deep listening, I would say, is more like, I would call it system three thinking, which is more integrating both intuitive and inner thinking with more of that outward thinking and connection with empathy.
I have, I'm sorry, I've gone to an autobiographical answer. And to channel Gretel, I fervently believe in the solace of open spaces, that you have to go outside and you have to be in the wide open and breathing the fresh air in order to get that kind of solace. And the open spaces is a space where there's no competition, there's no performance, there's only this invitation to drink in the gifts. But what you are teaching me, and it chagrins me to be such a slow learner, what you're teaching me is that there is a solace of intimate spaces, and that is silence. And that also is a kind of an open space where you can give up performance or competition and you can come into the presence of these gifts. So now what everybody else in this room knew, I'm discovering the solace of silence. And so, thank you, you guys. Sorry to be so dense.
I'm incredibly thankful for the gift that my grandfather gave me. It didn't feel like it necessarily at the time, but I think I shared this with all of you, that from about the age of 5 till I was 13, every day I had to go sit outside. And I wasn't allowed to move more than the circumference of my arms. And my favorite spot was under this big maple tree on a picnic bench. And I would sit and watch. And after an hour, he'd call me in and say, "What did you see?" And every day, snow, it didn't matter, rain, it didn't matter, you sat. And it's such a gift. As an artist, I feel like silence and pausing are so necessary because it opens that door. It's this threshold, I picture it clearly, where there is this great darkness. And I say that in the most profound, beautiful way, that everything is possible beyond this door. And I almost see myself as an antenna, just waiting for signal through this door. And then maybe that's inspiration or information, but that's what happens in that silence and that listening and the pause. And I've shared with you that for the last almost year, that's what I've been doing, is waiting for signal. And I know the signal's coming. I feel them. I just haven't been able to piece together what the message is. But it's pretty awesome.
So building on many things that you have said, if we're in the silence, rediscover our connections and hear truly what we might hear. I think what we might discover is not just or not only the joy in this connection, but I think an endless, profound grief cry that we've been disconnected for so long. So for me, in the silence is the potential, the great gift of healing, that healing that, addresses this. We're really connected, but we're trained out of it. We're wounded out of our connection. We're pulled out of that. So if we just stood still long enough to bear that, and if we were willing to experience the grief of having been separated, maybe from that we could begin to heal it.
So, of the activities that you offer in that question, silence, pausing, deep listening, I'm going to turning in my mind to these first two, silence and pausing. And essentially, meditation is that. Meditation is just an extended silent pause. That's what it is, a long silent pause. So for me, that practice, silence and pausing, opens up 4 discoveries. And every time I engage in that practice, not just the first time, but every time, I have those 4 discoveries anew. And in a way, they can happen anew because every moment is new. So 4 discoveries, and one is I discover the fullness of my present experience. And in that fullness, I find sufficiency, enoughness, that nothing more needs to be added. And in the case of our counsel, that the company of each other is sufficient, more than sufficient, full and rich. I find pausing with others incredibly powerful in that way. And my second discovery is I discover a holding environment to hold all truths, including difficult truths, with grace. And to echo the words of Kathy just now, open space. I find open space as a truth within my body and mind, as a kind of mirror of the open space of the natural world. And the third discovery that I have in this silence and pausing is the truth of organic interdependence, and not interdependence as an idea, but as a feeling and a truth, that I am a living organism, interdependent with my world and with my environment. And the fourth discovery that I find every time I pause in this way, even in this counsel, is the power of the non-conceptual, this quiet part of ourselves that is not thinking, but just being. That's one of the teachings that I get from being around animals. They are so being. They're just being beautifully, teaching how to be. And love lives in that domain of the non-conceptual. It's not, love is a feeling, not a thought. So for me also, this practice of pausing is an immediate invitation into love.
Just about that grief. That's all it is right now.
Oh, there's so much that's been offered here. Of all of the dimensions of this. I will just say that I think the quality of interruption sort of allies with something you said, Beth, about revolution. That to become silent and to pause is to interrupt our situation and allow all that has been lost to re-enter, all that has been submerged, and all that is fresh and new and present in the moment and full of possibility, vibrant, letting us be one with the wonder that we are and that the world is. We can just sit there with it. And it's the waves of thought and feeling that arise within it will also dissolve because it is infinite. And ever replenishing. And we may make our way in a new way from there. Why is it so important right now?